So, reading through an article from Zero Hedge, and they were talking about parts of the UK administering a new set of rules with their public schools, saying that they don't want to offend their Muslim students in the area of the arts. In Islam, particularly the more conservative form of Islam, you're not allowed to draw the human figure, you're not allowed to dance that might even accidentally touch like boys and girls. They can't even do that, and other prohibitions. They also said that they did not want to have any kind of reference to holidays like Christmas, for example, because that would also offend the Muslim students. So even in Muslim countries, even, you know, like in the Middle East, they have, for example, music that sounds somewhat modern, right? It's not the same as Western music, but they have their own type of modern music. That's prohibited under a much more conservative, sort of the Wahhabist brand of Islam that seems to be the very thing that has been imported into the West, especially in Western Europe. So the UK, as an American, it's hard to understand exactly what's going on, why people there seem to tolerate that. I think in other cultures, and this is true for European cultures, is that they're very peacemaking with public spaces. Like they don't really voice their opinions like Americans do. It's not that we don't have problems here, but it's a difference in culture. And this problem seems to exploit that issue in the culture where people might not agree with what's going on, but they just tolerate it because they're brought up in their culture to tolerate things. But I would think that this is an absolute mess. Now, the government in the UK also said, oh, that's okay, we're going to do a lot of surveillance, like they're implying that it's for the safety of the students. That surveillance is for the safety of their own institutions. That is the protection of the state. Any authoritarian state, their goal is to remain in power as an authoritarian state. And that's what the surveillance for. I promise you that is not for the protection of the students. So free speech is being under attack under the guise of political correctness, essentially. You have a culture that does not like Western culture that's being brought in there. You have that brand of Islam that does not like Western culture. Now, if these were people that wanted to assimilate, wanted to be a part of the country that they're moving to, weren't causing a problem, were there to follow the laws, that's one thing. That wouldn't cause an issue. But you're bringing in people who that don't respect the place that they're going to. And of course that causes problems. So the government is asking the citizens to adapt themselves around these people that are coming in. Any other country, this wouldn't work. You wouldn't see Chinese do this. Americans certainly don't do this, despite that in some parts of America they try to get you to do this. In Latin American countries, they wouldn't do this either. They wouldn't say, for example, in Brazil, oh, we have to not offend Muslim people that are coming over here. They wouldn't do that. You wouldn't see this in sub-Saharan Africa. You wouldn't see it in the Middle East. None of this stuff would be tolerated. The reason why they're doing this is because these are people who are, economically poor. They are usually on some kind of a, social welfare program. These are people that are generally easier to control for the state. The government wants to be more authoritarian, and it's more possible when you have, something like a very conservative form of Islam. Whereas the native population are accustomed to things like, free speech and criticizing their own government. So you see where this is all going. This is a bid for authoritarianism. And it's exploiting the culture, that polite culture that the West that many parts of the West do. They adapt to, their social environment so that they don't make such a fuss. But I mean, this is absurd. This is ridiculous. And at some point, they're going to have to address this. The people can't just, say, "Oh, let's bend backwards. Let's, you know, let's bend backwards for people who don't even respect them." There's another component to this as well. Another interesting thing that jumped out in this article is they were saying they wanted to teach critical thinking skills so that people wouldn't buy into what they call false narratives, or fake news, right? Like we see here in the United States. So that's a loaded term. They're not actually saying critical thinking. What they're saying is an extreme form of skepticism, so that you only believe what you're told, like what the government tells you. That's not the same as critical thinking. Critical thinking is comprehension, proper grammar, like proper diction, right? Because you think like in words. So you communicate effectively. You know how to put your thoughts together effectively. The other one is basic logic. So you learn that by learning basic math skills, right? 2 + 2 = 4. You got 2 red apples and 2 oranges. That equals 2 apples and 2 oranges. That's the basic components of critical thinking. Not not to say that not to criticize things that you see. So I say you see a lot of examples of communists, for example, committing acts of terrorism. Like say Antifa, for example. And you call Antifa a terrorist group, right? Because you see so many examples. This is called induction by enumeration. You see so many examples. You put it in the context of their ideology. They want to bring about they want to bring chaos into the existing social order so that they can bring in their egalitarian ideology. And so they are using terrorism as a political tool. They are a terrorist group. They'll say something like, well, not all Antifa are terrorists, and yada, yada, yada. In other words, they're using skepticism as a form of anti-reason. So anyway, that's another little interesting tidbit. But people need to learn critical thinking skills. People need to enforce. If something is right, if you logically formulate something, okay, this is the correct course of action because of X, Y, Z. Here's my argument. This is what is. In other words, it's a reflection on reality. If people are grounded in reality, they need to speak up and they need to hold others accountable to reality. And you can't just be nice about it, because if you do, you end up like the UK and you start to say, okay, let's adapt our culture to a foreign culture. It doesn't make any sense.